Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We are getting ready to do our Midrash in a kind of a podcast style format, not really using slides today. But before we get started, let's thank Abba for being full and satisfied. Abba, we've eaten and we're satisfied. We thank you for the lands in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen.
So a question often comes up, and it's sometimes one for debate here. It's in the first reading of Torah portion Bahar, on or in the mountain, that it talks about the Yovel as well as the Sabbath rest of the land, the every seventh year rest.
Mm-hmm.
And the question often comes up, when is the Sabbath year of rest? Because of the requirement to rest the land. But in a sense, I think that is not a relevant question, because the command here is not for the United States.
Right.
The concept, I'm sure, works because we know that from why the farmers rotate their crops. But the command to give your land a rest is specifically in verse 2, when you enter the land I'm giving you. The land itself is to observe a Shabbat rest for Adonai. So the context of this is Israel going into the land of Israel, not Americans in the United States or French in France or Dutch in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Although in a sense, that could be the land that's been given to us.
Sorry, again?
It's the land that we have entered into that's been given to us.
Okay. So, but is that what's implied here in the context of Vayikra 25?
I think it's not. I think the law, the statute there applies to Eretz Yisrael, but it's a good idea if you can figure it out and do it practice here. I think the concept is going to work. It's good. It's good husbandry. It's good.
Right.
It's good land management, and I think it's.
But are you sinning if you don't hear?
I don't believe so.
No,
I don't believe
but
so.
it is good stewardship of your land.
You bet.
What if someone says the reason it said this was because when they were wandering in the wilderness, they were not practicing agriculture and they weren't growing anything because they were strictly gathering manna.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't planting seeds or planting trees or pruning vines or anything like that.
Okay. Well, how would you answer that then?
Yeah. What would you say to that?
So the thing that I see here is they're being told, when you come into this land, there's going to be all these things that are already here that are growing for you, and this is how you're to handle it. And so when we come into whatever land we're in, the change isn't that we have gone from being not in the land, not in the promised land, to being in the promised land. The change is when we switch from a non-agrarian lifestyle to an agrarian lifestyle.
Yeah.
So it used to be that maybe I lived in an apartment building in a city and I didn't grow anything. And now I've moved into the country. I've been blessed with land, and now I can start farming and growing my own food. What practices am I to follow when I change my lifestyle? Instead of getting my daily bread following directly as manna from the sky, I am now going to be growing my own crops, relying on Yahweh to provide the rain and keep away the pests, and then I will eat these.
Well, especially coming out of Egypt, because they use the Nile River and they only use alluvial flooding
Mhm.
to fertilize. So every year their soil would change out. And they terraced and had channels to get water from the Nile.
So I think you kind of answered the question too. Like we were just saying here, it's a good practice to do here, and if you want the best results, I'd say try to figure out a way to do that. But also something we don't do here, farmers don't do here, is keep the edges of their fields from being harvested. They pull the fences and harvest every tiny grain of wheat they can get their hands on. And so there are some things that our farmers here don't do. And even if they did leave their wheat fields here, because that's what grows here basically is wheat and cotton, right? So even if they left their fields,
Who would glean?
who would go glean it, right?
Mhm.
Other than
You can
Other
go down
than
to a welfare
the
office
doomsday
and
preppers that
apply.
have their own wheat grinders, you know.
Yeah,
I'm not,
they wouldn't have the means to process it even if they did.
yeah, exactly, right. So, but the I think the method that the father set down for Eretz Israel, it would work anywhere, but I can't bring myself to believe that you're committing a sin if you don't do it here. If you go there and don't do it, that's a different story, because that's the land he was speaking about. When you Israelites cross over the Jordan and take possession of this land that I'm giving you right now, these are the rules that apply here.
The other part of it, I mean, that is only one aspect of this, this system, because there's also the part about the tribal ownership of the land. Land not to be sold in perpetuity, because
Yeah.
land belongs to me.
Right.
You're only foreigners and temporary residents with me. So you also, when you sell property, you have to give the right of redemption. And so if you sell the property of your land, it can be redeemed by one of your kinsmen as well. We don't do that here.
Right.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
And
we
you
know.
can do
Not
that
here.
there.
no. I don't think
Not
it's
anymore.
Well, it doesn't sound to me, reading why Israel was thrown out of the land in the first temple period, that they ever did that. At least,
Right.
and that's why the land.
That's why
That's where they're thrown out into Babylon, because of not giving the land its rest. Now, I'm not sure about the other part. I don't know that we're given the details of where they did this land sale or the Yovel, but we know that they did not give the land their rest. And even today, Israel's not giving the land their rest.
Sure.
They're not owning the land; they're selling it to a Gentile for the Yovel or for the Shemitah year. But the land's still working, even though it's not owned by an Israelite.
Yeah.
Or Jew in this case.
And that's not a good workaround,
I
is
don't
it?
think it is.
Yeah.
Jewish attorneys.
And I did read one commentary that says they can't sell their land. They can sell their houses, but they can't sell their land.
Well, land is what's not to be sold in
Yeah,
perpetuity.
in perpetuity, yeah.
So houses do not necessarily account for that.
Right.
So it's like within cities, I guess, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I don't know what their organization was. I mean, like here in the United States, there's a farmhouse and land. In Germany, in Europe, there's this town where the farmers live, and the farm is outside the town.
Yeah.
And so they live in the town, but work the farms on the outskirts of the town.
It's interesting.
So the land is literally separate from the home.
Because they lived in walled cities.
That's something too that we've discussed over the years many times, is if we could figure out when the Shmitah really is, or when the Jubilee really is, if we could get back on something that we've talked about here. Let's try to get back onto that somehow. Figure out exactly when it was. It's tough. I mean, you get a pretty good educated idea of when the last Yovel was, when the next one coming up is. We're just not 100% sure at the moment. So we do the best we can, right?
So it's another thing that's like Shabbat. If nobody bothered to keep track of the days of the week anymore, after a while, just nobody would know. And one of the things with keeping Shemitah and Yovel is that when everybody is counting along doing it, then they know when those cycles are. And
Yeah.
when people stop doing it and you don't know when it is, then you just flat out lose track of it.
That's what happened with Babylon, I think.
Maybe I think it probably happened after the destruction of the Second Temple period, because they probably were knowledgeable about that when they were in Babylon, because there's recent enough memory. Only 70 years is not enough time to forget that, and they're counting on coming back based on the number of rotations of the 7-year period. But when they went into the exile and no one could own any land in the land, I think that's when the thing got forgotten. When there's no functioning priesthood, particularly after the the Sanhedrin was disbanded by the Romans, there was no way to even have a
Have it
court system, so
declared.
to speak, or declaration.
But can it be viewed in a small setting, although everyone is not back in Israel yet? However, it's like as people move from place to place, as the children move place to place, and yes, they come into a home, they come into land in itself, right? Some lands are already fruitful, right? So it's like a lesson. It's like you're learning the land as it goes for those 6 years of what the land has been providing you, and on the 7th year, it rests. So then on that next year, you already know what to do to get that land right, because sometimes when I look at it as in some people are coming into it because they may have forgotten the old ways or not know how to take care of the land or to have the land work. This is what has been, you're learning the lesson into how to keep the land,
Sure,
give it rest, and then work the land again.
sure.
Kind of a follow-up question might be, okay, so we're kind of in agreement then that they really have not kept track, and so there's a dispute between which year is the Shemitah year, which year is the Yovel. So when we go back to Israel and we're in the land, and they do implement this, what if our studies show that a different Shemitah year, a different Yovel than the authorities come up with in the land?
Or a different calendar.
Or different calendar, I suppose. Well, I think that if the calendar restoration, I mean, that is part of I think the restoration of Israel as well. I mean, there's getting away from a solidly printed calendar and going to what an observational calendar that probably was followed in the Second Temple period, like the Israel New Moon Society does today. But it could be a different calendar as well. I mean, with different calendars, for example, if you're using like what's called they call it the Zadokite calendar. What is it called? The calendar that called the Dead Sea Scrolls calendar, the Enochian calendar, I guess.
Mhm.
Have a kind of a rotating
Enochian is
Shabbat.
360 days.
Well, yes, but there's 364 because of every quarter there's an added day to it.
Right.
But so it's essentially a rotating weekly Sabbath, though, I think, in that one, isn't it? But as is right now, the buses stop running around 1400 on Friday afternoon.
Mhm.
So you'd be really hard pressed to fully keep your own calendar apart from the rest of the land. So I'm talking particularly in the year, though, this would be with the year.
Sure. It could be too that while we're trying to figure out and go back and go back and go back and go back and back and try to figure out when the Yovel was and then try to pick it back up to present time, perhaps might not be as important as getting back and reestablishing it.
If that were the case, we'd follow whatever the ruling authorities' instructions were for when they're declaring the Yovel and that sort of thing. So there's
Right.
not basically bringing disunity to the community.
Yeah. Could be. I haven't necessarily read anything that suggests that it's going to have to go back and be exactly from the first one to now, because there's obviously been a humongous break when it's not been kept. I think the fact if we can get it reestablished, this is year one, or let's start with 50. Let's have a Jubilee year this year, right now, set all the captives free, all the property goes back to whoever it belongs to, and let's start doing this the right way. I have to believe that Adonai would honor that.
And you believe that will be the year when Yeshua returns.
Possibly. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying if we could make it happen,
Before that,
could be, yeah. I'm just saying
Sometimes, but
if we could get it established, that's a step in the
For
right
sure,
direction
when it comes, it would
to
be
usher
established properly.
to usher Mashiach back.
Yeah, that's
so what I'm thinking is so many things sort of fell in accordance to whatever was on the calendar. And in a particular note for Yeshua being sacrificed the same time the Pesach lambs were being sacrificed.
Right.
And then the coming of the Ruach HaKodesh on
Shavuot,
and
right.
Mhm.
such. Will Yeshua return on Yom Teruah? Seems like that's maybe a rather likely choice for the day that it will be.
Mhm.
Will it be that then begins the year of the Yovel? If that's when all the wars are cease and such. So I don't know for sure, what the timeline is there, if he's returning and then it's going to be immediate peace, or if there's going to be a period of conflict before that comes. But I think when that's done, if I had to guess, my guess would be it's going to line up with what an actual Hayovel was.
It's not a bad. I don't disagree with that, honestly. It's a good assumption. Things happen on dates throughout history. So,
So even though men have lost count,
God never
yes.
Yeah.
So, Lucia says Shabbat Shalom. Blessings to Betafella of London.
Shabbat Shalom, Lucia.
Hi, Lucia.
So, well, to go along that, my thought process on this would be if the return of or during the return of the Messiah, would everything be given to all the seed, like a full download, as they enter back into the land, so that everybody will already be tracking the dates or the order in which things are going to be, instead of being retaught.
Like by the Ruach, because
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
that's what happened in 2014 and 2015. I found that there's so many people that have a testimony in that year of awakening to the truth, and it was done by Abba's spirit. There was like this shaking. So I was thinking that too. He just
Well, that's
shows it
kind
by
of
his
what
spirit.
Pentecost was too. It was all
Yeah.
at one time.
So I'm assuming that download would be at the same time when Yah provides the
Mhm.
new language that only his children would know. So I would assume all the information would be will be given at that same time, where everybody will be on the same accord.
By his spirit.
That's my assumption, but if I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
I don't know.
Well, even with the Ruach, at Shavuot, they could hear it in their own language, but they still needed to be taught, preached to them.
Yeah, it still needed to come out.
They didn't automatically, even with coming of the Ruach, didn't automatically have complete knowledge and understanding of Yeshua's.
It had to be
sacrifice.
spoken.
It was preached to them so they could understand it. So there's an element of the evangelism.
We're still gonna have to
That's
be
right.
taught.
They understood it in their own languages. He didn't change the languages.
Yeah, right.
The only time he's ever changed languages on people was, I think, at Babel.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but when they did receive the Ruach, all of them spoke the same during the Ruach, because that's how how did they speak our language? Because although all of them spoke differently when they received
They
the
all
Ruach,
understood
they spoke
it.
It's just how they heard it.
It says
They
that
heard it in their own language.
understood in his own
They
language.
understood it. Yeah.
Right.
But you can be sure it wasn't spoken in gibberish.
Mhm.
Eat bondage.
If it was, if they understood it.
Even if it
Well,
was.
the other thing about
Even if it was, they understood.
it's the regathering where everyone's cast out at Babel into 70 nations or
Mhm.
whatever.
Undoing Babel.
And yeah, when he comes back, it's the regathering. So there would be more unity in it.
We done?
It kind of seemed like everybody's rolling out.
That was just the warm up. That was the warm up from Bob.
Bahar is a good had several of the youth challenge questions.
Yeah, and they called me and asked me about that too this week. The kids
What,
did.
what you know what the questions were?
They wanted to know, see if you knew what the questions were.
I didn't know what the answer was.
The answer is
7.
The answer is, you better be here.
It should have been that.
Yeah. What else you got?
no.
Go to 2 Corinthians chapter 11. A couple things, and hopefully we can, if you see something that pops out, that's what we're going to try to do here today. Just try to discuss it a little bit. What I wanted to preface by saying it kind of seems like still these last 2 chapters, once again, Paul is on the defense, trying to
Somebody's accused you of something.
somebody's accused him of something else. You know, maybe I don't talk really well, but I'm not stupid.
I don't know it.
Doesn't mean I don't know it. I asked. I have a Hebrew speaking friend who actually from Israel, and I asked him. I said, "Do people stutter in Hebrew?" And he said, that was a funny question to him because he said, "I've never heard anybody, not like in the United States. You know, some folks have stuttering problems. I know some that have bad stuttering problems.
Why would that be?
I'm not sure."
Any language.
I asked him. He said, "That's a weird question that he's never heard anybody stutter in Hebrew." And the same way, I remember years and years ago when I was stationed in Korea, and I was trying to learn the language. One of my Katusa says, it sounds like you're stuttering, but we don't have stuttering here. So I'm like, okay, wow. So I don't know. So maybe he says, he doesn't speak well, whatever the case is. Maybe he gets uptight, and maybe there is, but this particular guy hadn't ever heard anyone.
Maybe Paul meant he don't feel he communicated properly the ideas.
It's possible. Yeah.
Because he was, what did the disciple or apostle say? Paul's very educated. We don't understand everything he say.
Peter said that, yeah. Hard to understand. So, but anyway, he's back on the defense, right?
Just so with Moshe, we could suspect that Moshe was extremely well educated, but what was his complaint about his ability to
I
speak?
couldn't speak, yeah.
Said he stuttered. Yeah. Well, that's what we get. in
Well, that's
English,
what the translators say.
Yeah, what the translators say.
He's
I don't know.
some kind of impediment or something.
But
Some kind
it
of
could
speech
mean
impediment.
tongue-tied too. I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
what it meant.
I don't know what it means either, but
He in the book of Yasher, his tongue was singed because he was about to make a choice in the king's palace, and they said they were about to kill him as a child, and they were going to take him out if he chose rightly. And the angel of the Lord had him choose wrong, and he touched a hot coal to his mouth, and it burned him. Those details are in the book of Yasher, but it's not in the 1611. It wound up saving his life, but he kept that throughout his life.
cool.
For me, it's an advantage when I go to a foreign country and don't speak the language, and I don't get into arguments with anybody.
So good
It's
point.
kind of like having my tongue seared, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't know the language, how do you know they're arguing?
That's a
From what I
good point.
see.
How do you know they aren't?
You can tell if it was arguing with him. He was making my
Facial expressions, or if they're hitting you while they're saying.
One thing about verse 2, chapter 11, verse 2 says, I'm reading from a complete Jewish Bible. I'm jealous for you with God's kind of jealousy, since I promised to present you as pure virgin in marriage to your one husband, the Messiah. So if you think about that being presented to the Messiah as his bride, he is the husband. Taking a look back, I'm trying to remember perhaps Jeremiah, where Yah says, I am your husband, right? So you have to ask the question, does Yah receive a different bride than Yeshua receives? Do they get different people? Or are they all the same? Are they believers? Does Yah receive a different bride than Yeshua receives?
I think not.
I would think not
I
also.
think it's the pride of a parent.
So my point is, here is if they received the same bride, then the assembly at Corinth are part of those people, right?
Yeah. I was thinking, though, it looks like he's the father and he's presenting. He's the one who's gotten the bride prepared to meet the groom, and he's hoping that the bride is beautiful and virtuous and pure.
Yeah.
Because he's spent all this time
Even though it seems
preparing
like
her.
they're not going to be. Right?
Sounds like he's a disappointed father.
Yeah.
His
I was
daughter
trying to do this,
messed around.
but it does lead you to believe that no matter what was happening, they are part of the assembly, right?
Or at least he's hoping that they made good faith.
Mhm. What else we got? Pick through and find what you find interesting. Let's talk it out.
Well, I think it's interesting how many times that Paul was beaten or
Yeah,
endured
Mhm.
danger.
5 times, 40 lashes less one from the Jews. 3 times beaten with rods. Once he was stoned. 3 times shipwrecked.
But even indefinite detention isn't exactly a minor thing either.
Right.
Right.
So he was held on for 2 years on the grounds that somebody might come up and bring charges against him.
Yeah, he was held on just in case.
So moving back up to verse 5, and this one talks about super emissaries or super apostles.
Yeah.
I wonder who those
What's up with
were
that?
were being basically opposed to him by being super apostles, whatever that even means.
I'm going to guess and say that those were perhaps the ones accusing him in this go around. Don't listen to this guy. Can't even speak right.
Yeah.
How can you follow this guy? Listen to
But
us.
who was there preaching opposite of him or against him for that time? What would be their doctrine? Would it be like early stage Gnosticism or something else? I mean, maybe he doesn't say they're from the party of the circumcision.
Doesn't say that, does he? No. But he goes on to say later on, you just stand and take it when somebody makes you into a slave or
But
feeds
the
this
reason I'm
stuff.
thinking that it's Gnosticism is his next statement. I may not be a skilled speaker, but I do have knowledge or the knowledge.
Yeah.
And remember, Gnosticism is about secret knowledge of things.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that it's,
Could be the Gnostics.
yeah, so it could be some type of, someone who really knows because he has secret knowledge of things. So follow him because of his super knowledge or maybe not super intellect, but secret and super knowledge perhaps.
And for a small donation,
Small,
$39.99.
we will pass on that knowledge to you.
paint your car any color for.
$100.
Yeah.
Would it had to have been that he's referring to those people themselves as super emissaries? What if he's saying, I know there are all these people that are not, there's always people, there are some people that are trying to claim that they have a better message or better understanding than I have. But do you even think that I'm behind than those apostles who are like Peter and John and James and stuff, who are indeed like truly the top ones? So if he's saying there are these others who say things, but if you consider me, I'm no different than even the top apostles. So
Oh, I
he
see
might
what you're
not be alleging that it's like Peter that's doing this or whatever, and he's not crowning the people that are doing this as being actual super emissaries. But he's saying, for them, if you think about me, I mean, I'm in the category more like, Peter and John and James and such. And so that might be how he's trying to say that, as opposed to that he's calling the people who are making these allegations, that he's actually dignifying them with the title of super emissary.
Mine says false emissaries.
It almost,
In verse 5?
it almost seems as if
17,
there's someone
11,
else that's
17.
preaching
Yeah.
a gospel, but they're not speaking it in the truth in which he is speaking it, which they're showing doubt within him.
Yeah, that's
As
what
if
Wayne was
he's-
saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
Gnosticism. Yeah. Mhm.
but now
It's interesting.
he's proven again who he is.
Once again, he says that he didn't
Mhm.
take any money from them, even though they offered,
This
Right.
in mine, it says,
which suggests that other people are taking money from them, perhaps.
it says false
Like Martin.
emissaries masquerading as Messiah
It
emissaries.
has later on. So, for suppose that I'm not a whit behind the very chiefest apostles. And then later on, he says about these other ones, but such are false apostles, deceitful workers. So he's saying, I'm not a whit behind. I'm not one lick short of Peter
What they
and John and James and all those ones down in Jerusalem. But these other ones who are talking trash about me, they are false apostles. And so he's not referring to them as chief apostles or super emissaries. He's saying, for the people who actually are, I'm in their league. And for these other people who are saying these things, they're false
They're the ones that are
apostles.
false.
So clearly he's not calling them
Yeah.
super emissaries.
No, it says masquerading as servants of
Yeah,
righteousness.
that's good. I like that.
Sounds smart.
So they had televangelists.
Kind of sounds like it, right?
Apparently, yeah. And they must have been asking for money.
Yeah, if you don't give me 1 million shekels, I'm being called home to glory.
On my liturgy.
Let's see. We had something in chapter 12. Let's talk about this thing here in chapter 12. Have to boast. There's nothing to be gained by it, but I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord. I know a man in union with the Messiah who 14 years ago was snatched up to the third heaven. Whether he was in the body or outside the body, I don't know, but God knows.
Wouldn't you like for him to tell who that was?
Yeah, I would like to know who that was, and
I think it's him.
think it's him.
Yeah,
I think he was speaking of himself.
Yeah. And perhaps some of these false or masquerading emissaries were claiming visions and things that were maybe perhaps weren't true. And he's saying,
Yeah.
well, I have, but I'm not boasting about them. Am I?
So then there's a question: what is the third heaven? So the greatest opinion is, what is the first? The first heaven is the sky, right?
Mhm.
Second heaven is where the stars are, and the third heaven is where the throne of Elohim is, right? That's a large description you can find anywhere. Of course,
I've actually heard some.
There's a lot more
8 or
others.
9.
Seventh heaven. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Ultra's not about 7.
7. Mm-hmm. Zohar talks about more than that, right?
Well, maybe. I thought I read 7 in the Zohar. They might be wrong.
I'm not going to claim to be an expert on that, and I haven't really studied it out, but I do find it interesting. The third heaven.
So then you would
It's
have to
perplexing.
first define what they mean by a heaven.
Yeah. In this case, the third heaven, they're saying is what? Gan Eden, right?
Paradise.
Paradise, Pardes.
I thought it said that's where they throw guys.
6-siders, 20-siders, what?
7 commandments.
Has anybody studied that out? These different levels of heaven?
I've read about it in the
There's
past. but I've
different-
lost
Same.
it.
Same.
I don't think any of that.
Read about it in the past, but it's been a long time. Used to know a guy who was obsessed with understanding it.
Yeah.
Is that
That's how
same
you
guy
get in
Paul
rabbit
used to know?
trails.
Well, I guess the question in my mind is, well, I've heard it said that this passage refutes the ideas of seven heavens or the seventh heaven kind of thing. But does he say that's the only one or the highest one, or what does he
Nope.
say here?
He doesn't say that. He just says ascended to the third heaven.
Yeah.
Whether in the body or apart from the body, he doesn't know.
Right.
Was snatched into Gan Eden and heard things that cannot be put into words, things that are unlawful for human being to utter.
Yeah.
So maybe he did get a coal put on his tongue. Made him stutter. Or not speak, since he couldn't tell what he saw in.
Well, I think she was talking about Moshe.
Yeah, oh, okay.
But who was the other, who got his lips cleaned by the coal?
Ezekiel was it?
Ezekiel.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about this, and maybe I'll look into it someday. But like Cece said, when you start digging into stuff like that, you get into rabbit holes. And
So what about
Very
verse
godly.
7, the thorn in the flesh, the conversation about?
Mhm.
Often disputed rather, because he doesn't really define that either. Verse 7, thorn in the flesh. What was that?
messenger from the adversary to pound away at me so that I wouldn't grow conceited. Three times I begged the Lord to take this away from me.
He could have been referring to whatever he was talking about, not being able to communicate. Speech impediment or
That he
whatever.
has the knowledge, but he cannot get it out because it's not supposed to be spoken.
I've heard a speculation that was talking about eyesight.
No.
Because he
Oh, yeah,
had
yeah.
somebody else write and
That was
he
the
wrote
most
in
right
large
in
hand.
large letters.
Mm-hmm.
And even that could have been
As a result of
a
his
purple
blindness.
heart type thing, yeah, that he was from the stoning or beating with
All
rods
the
or
abuse
something,
he received.
or even an injury in the shipwreck or whatever.
It's just amazing. God uses people to do things like that. And have all these things in the way of them doing that, but sends them someone to help them do it. Why
Yeah,
didn't he send the one who could do it? Why don't he send the one who would think? And someone to help him.
holding up Moshe's arms.
Yeah, exactly. Or, Moses wasn't able to talk to the king, but his brother was.
That's good.
Or he could have said, his brother said, Moses. He uses the weak. So nobody can say, oh, man did that.
Yeah.
Right. The least likely person ever took care of it because. Yeah, gotcha. Chapter 13, I find it interesting that verse 1, this will be the third time that I've come to visit you. Any charge must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Where do we find that? 1950. All matters are established by 2 or 3 witnesses, saying right there, in my mind, the Torah is not done away with. Because Paul is keeping it, proclaiming it, can't deny it.
He's doing it wrong. He said he came here 3 times. Is his own witness 3 times?
Yeah, that's it.
It does, it's another fuel or love on the fire that he knows he's going there and risking defending himself against some accusation.
Yeah.
3 steps you're out too.
So if this is chronological in terms of where we are with the facts, this comes after he's already defended himself in Jerusalem against people coming against him for allegedly teaching not to teach his work to children.
Yeah.
So he's defending himself there in Acts 21, we're reading Acts 20. We read the second part of Acts 21 today, earlier in Acts 21, earlier in Acts 21, he defends himself against
Second part of Acts 20. And almost all of 21. Started at 20 verse 7. So yeah. So he's catching it from all over the place, isn't it? Like every direction.
All part of the plan. It's prophesied that he would appear before in Rome.
Yeah.
So through all those steps, he can
And interesting, you can kind of justify. Paul says, and I believe it's true. Do you not understand you're dealing with a Roman citizen here?
he doesn't lie.
Because he was born in Tarsus, right? And that came under Roman Empire, under Roman authority.
They have a special dispensation, not the right word, but they were, to say Tarsus one something, so everybody born in Tarsus was
Some sort of reciprocity. Yeah. So it's true.
Well, and also, technically, the gospel was presented to the whole world because Rome was the world.
Yeah, right.
I mean, he does quite a bit. He proclaimed when he had to that he was a Jew.
Right.
Yeah.
So and he was fixed to make a point to establish commonality with who he was, or at least part of the crowd had him on his side. He was like, all you guys.
I believe the same way you do. Yeah. And don't we do that all the time? You have to establish credibility in order to be heard. So.
I thought that was actually kind of funny what he divided the Pharisees and Sadducees.
That was he knew who controlled. Even though Sadducees may have controlled the priesthood, he knew who was really in charge, right?
Well, but also, I think he used it. I mean, he used. I would portray it as he used everything within his power to spread the message of the gospel.
Yes. Yeah.
Everything, all the tools you find. The citizenship is just one tool.
Yeah.
To bring out the message that we choose for correction.
So we'll receive within your message. You can tell who you're talking to.
Save them from some meetings. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe on time.
Where he wanted to go to, I guess.
In terms of evangelism, so to speak, I think it's a true fact. It's a true statement, at least that in general, people who are from your culture are more effective spreaders of the gospel message than someone who's coming from, from the United States coming to some other place. More effective than someone who's from their own culture.
Yeah. You have a kinship.
You can automatically get that, information. You both the same, kinship, background, culture, and speak that message more effectively because you already, you're doing it in translation.
They can't say, who's this guy? You don't know what we're going through.
Yeah, right.
He's what to do. He's one of us. Okay. Well, we know this.
You want to the tree.
It's interesting too that he didn't follow the advice Yeshua gave his Talmudim when they go to a city and they weren't accepted. Dust your feet off and move on. He didn't do that. He kept right on plugging, didn't he?
Yeah. That was for a certain time period.
Yeah, no, right. Yeah,
It was a mission that had a
he just
beginning and
kept
end.
it up.
Well, what Tim talked about, the mission of kicking from the dust off the feet was time period between then and basically the Passover.
Yeah. Because it would just be easy to say, all right, I can accept it. I'm done with it. Let me find somebody who will listen. Kept trying. Gotta respect that.
So like in 13 verse 12 says, greet one another with a holy fist bump.
Fist bump. It's easy. I think it's easy to understand what that is. In the Middle East, they still kind of do that. Just little kiss on the cheek. And it's simultaneous. Everyone they do. I don't know if they do it in Israel, but in the Middle East they do. In Italy, it's pretty. I think we know what we're talking about there. When we get over to Acts chapter 20, starting verse 7,
Our reading was actually 21:37.
20, well, it was 27 to 21:37. 20 verse 7 to 21:37, right?
21 verse 37.
Oh, okay, I see. My bad. Was that a rhetorical? No, I just had something silly in the back of my head.
If you want to start 20 verse 7 to Midrash, then go ahead. I should not. We were gathered to break bread.
Well, it's interesting about that 20 verse 7. I don't know why it's kind of stuck in my head that is a verse they're used to say that the Sabbath is done away with, right? Often. Because they met on the first day of the week. And, I think if you really get down and take a look at it as a Marine, you'll see they were probably still hanging out after Havdalah, if they did Havdalah at the time. Sabbath was over and they were still kind of hanging together. You can see it even still.
Midnight, and then after midnight, it's the next day.
Yeah, right? After the sun goes down, right? It's the next day. And you can kind of see it. I don't think it was, if you really take even just a half-hearted look at it, you can't decide, oh, Sabbath has changed to Sunday. I don't see it.
Clearly, they left on the ship at dawn. So if you're saying that it's on Sunday, well, that means it's before sunrise on Sunday.
Right?
So
All right. We already said the bus is shut down.
If they wouldn't be leaving on Sunday, would they, if it's Shabbat change to Sunday? They wouldn't be leaving on Sunday.
They sure wouldn't.
What were they gathered together?
Breaking bread.
Okay, maybe it's not something. Another place, I was collecting money to take to the program in Jerusalem.
Oh, yeah.
He said to collect all of it, meet me on the first day of the week. Take the money and take to
And
Jerusalem.
it wouldn't be handling
And he wouldn't be handling money on the Sabbath. Yeah. 27, 20, what did you say it was 27, 37?
21:37.
What is happening to me? It's right in front of my face if I just read. 21:37. The child was about to be brought to the barracks and said to the commander, "All right, if I say something to you?" And he was surprised. You know Greek? So that is confirmation that he could speak at least Greek and Hebrew.
And it's unusual for Greeks, for you to speak Greek. He was surprised by it.
It was. But they also thought it was an Egyptian.
But then you're not an Egyptian.
Yeah. Aren't you that Egyptian who tried to start a revolution?
Yeah.
Did we ever read about that?
I think that was the surprise, was that he's speaking Greek, but he thought he was an Egyptian. It's like, oh, well, then obviously you're not an Egyptian if you're
Yeah.
speaking Greek.
Yeah.
No, I'm a Roman.
So Paul looked like an Egyptian.
He walked like one. Walked like an Egyptian. Sorry.
We're going to do the Steve Martin imitation now.
That'd probably be you. again back on the defense. So he stayed in the defense for a long time. But like you said, he was incarcerated just in case something was going to happen. And it's interestingly that he was warned not to go to Jerusalem, but he did anyway, right? He knows what's coming. He did it anyway.
Holy Spirit.
That's always a question too. That if he was told by the Father to go to Jerusalem, how could he be warned by the Holy Spirit not to go? Just a question. Just throw it out.
I think the warning was, this is going to be dangerous. So,
Some versions
Get ready.
kind of make it sound like, well, it's just the same as with, and leads me down donkeys. God told him to go, the angel of God said no.
Also, what happened? God told Joseph to pack up and go. Oh, I changed my mind. Something's going to happen. I've been warned in a dream. He went by another route. So things do happen.
He could have been determined to go regardless, but and just ignored, not necessarily ignored, took heed of the warning.
Yeah.
But since he was strong, I would accept the death that would come to me just like the
I'm not
Messiah
willing to make that sacrifice.
sacrifice. So regardless of what they're saying, hey, I'm still going. I'm going.
ultimately, this decision did lead to his, led from here to his death.
Yeah. Maybe he was ready. He's like, I'm ready to fit in my spirit, man. Take me now.
Ready to go home.
What else you guys got? What do you want to talk about? Oh, yeah, interesting here that when Saul was sort of bad-mouthing the Kohen Hagadol, he's like, oh, I didn't know it was the Kohen Hagadol because the Torah says you're not to speak disparaging of a ruler of your people. How was I to know? Oops.
But that kind of suggests that he wasn't wearing any type of priestly garment.
Yeah, you would know if
It
it's
suggests who he was.
I think it also is condemning because they change so often. They're not, Kohen Gadol is not going until his lifetime, but it's bought and sold.
Bought and sold, bought and paid for position now.
Now, some of them argued that Paul was being sarcastic.
I'd say
He
so.
really did know that he was saying you're not, essentially saying you're not acting like you are the Kohen Gadol.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I wouldn't have known that.
Based on how you're speaking, they obviously not keeping on Torah observant, so you can't get people high priest.
It reminds me of a story we used to hear, guys driving down the road and these flipping people off and yelling obscenities at all the traffic and cussing people out and all that stuff. And
That's Maranatha come on the back of his bumper.
right, and the cop pulls him over and pulls him out at gunpoint, thinking it was a stolen car. He's like, "What are you talking about? It's my car." He says, "Well, on the back it says I believe in Yeshua, or I believe in Jesus." And you're talking like that. I had to assume the car was stolen.
So what the lesson is,
yeah. Don't
don't cuss,
don't get caught.
Remove the bumper sticker before you-
Remove the bumper sticker.
get your heat gun, and
How about do the right thing? If you're
Do
gonna
we know
put on the
anything else about what the Tzaddikim believe?
Sure, a lot.
the source we go from are Pharisaic sources.
Opposite side of things.
Yeah. As far as I know, there's no writings of the Tzaddikim that have survived about themselves.
About themselves, right?
They got wiped out with the fall of. I think they're still around because there's a subgroup called the Boeotians that I think are associated with the United States. But in terms of what we know about them, besides they were, from what the Pharisees taught, they were stricter in some things. And or what their view was that it was incorrectly strict in some ways. But there's not really much to know about it except for the resurrection. What I call maybe more things than that, but the resurrection.
That's the big one.
Big rise. It is said that they're followers of Antiochus of Soko, who taught them that taught his disciples. Now, Antiochus of Soko wasn't a Sadducee, but it was one of his disciples who misunderstood and misrepresented what he taught. Like the translation he used there, but that he said that you don't keep the Torah, you get a reward. And so the view from that came, there is no reward for keeping the Torah. So if that's the case, then the reward means there's no resurrection, there's no afterlife. Derivative of where the Sadducee movement came from, it's an doctrine from that.
There are some opinions that suggest that there were some Sadducees that did believe in the resurrection. There weren't very many. They don't seem to be present here either. But there is some evidence that suggests that some of them did. But based on familial lines, that the Sadducees are part of the priesthood.
I thought you read it somewhere else that it would necessarily right family that came priesthood under the Roman purchasing of it.
There's something else I saw here. Interesting, was it? Okay.
Paul had a sister who lived there too.
Yeah, right? Then we kind of get a pretty good history lesson.
One of the points that I think is worth highlighting is that 25:5. If you have to come back before that point, but Paul says, "I have committed no offense, not against the Torah, to Jews hold, and not against the temple, and not against the emperor." So Paul lying. I think that our view, of course, he's not lying, he's telling the truth. I think, though, that most of Christianity think that Paul is stretching the truth a lot by saying he has committed offense against the Torah. So if you think that Paul did commit an offense against the Torah, then you're calling Paul a liar. But be bad for your theology.
Yeah.
He doubles down on that and says in chapter 26, verse 22, "It was because of these things that Jews seized me in the temple and tried to kill me. However, I've had God's help, so to this day I stand testifying to both small and great, saying nothing but what both the prophets and Moshe said would happen. That the Messiah would die, and that he, as the first to rise from the dead, would proclaim light to the people and to the nations." So Paul is saying here, he said nothing but what the prophets and Moshe said would happen. Where did the prophets and Moshe say that the Torah get involved? So again, if you say that Paul is saying that, you're calling him a liar.
Yeah.
I guess so.
I was looking at the ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. They're calling it a sect that then was a Jewish sect.
Well, they've said before, we don't understand what they're talking about. They're having some argument about the Torah.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So it's an internal Jewish argument at this point, really.
Yeah.
And okay, Paul in Acts 21 with Paul and the temple service and willing willing to do a Nazarite vow, he says that he had been ceremonially purified without the crowd, not causing disturbance. He had not done anything against the Torah, and then there was doing what he was doing with the Nazarite, ending the Nazarite vow.
Mhm.
And he's been ready to go to do that in the temple. That's Acts 24, 17, 18. 19.
Yeah.
And his accusers for that are not even there, it says. Some Jews from province of Asia, they ought to be here before you make a charge if they have anything against me. But they were being tried or charged with something. The accusers who actually were making the accusations are not there. So he's not standing before his accusers. They're not even there.
Right.
See what's similar to a lot of like how long it is.
Yeah. I got the ticket. Is the officer present? No. Dismissed. That's happened before.
Whether in the body or in the
You
spirit,
know.
I don't want to say.
But whenever I go to court, inevitably some officer couldn't make it, whatever. Or if it's something serious, I'll say we're going to continue this until he can be here.
Yeah. Or if the prosecutor told the officer to do this.
Because he knew how I'm going to let this go. Yeah. Oh, that's true too. Yeah.
Yes. It's better than a lot of others.
That's all I'm talking about. Unless you guys got something else that strikes your fancy, you'd like to. This is pretty fun.
Seems like you have more of an opportunity to input than going to the site.
Yeah. I think we do the slides often just to keep things on track and not go down rabbit holes.
Well, sometimes that rabbit hole, like we're doing today, can lead to a good discussion.
Yeah.
I think with a smaller group, it's easier to do it this way.
Yeah. Many of you don't have time to hear everybody.
I know. My rabbit hole's bigger than your rabbit hole.
Let's vote. Our Father, King, thank you for allowing us to Midrash today and your word, and for giving us the freedom to do that. Thank you for the wisdom and insight you brought to us today. We ask you to give us a good. We ask this in Yeshua's name. Amen.
I mean.